थोड़ा ब्रॉड आम थे चलो 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 Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. So once again we are here for the concluding day of 2 days seminar on integrating risk informed planning for sustainable development. So we are honored that today our chief guest for the 2 days program has joined us, our engineer S.R. Madni Sahab. He has been the former secretary to government of J&K, respected executive committee members once again, other dignitaries, senior most engineers, and once again our keynote speaker today, Dr. Parvez Ahmed from the University of Kashmir. So welcome all and other participants today. Thank you all and other participants who have also joined us, maybe from the different departments as well. Welcome on this seminar. Please come forward. आप बेटा आगे आ जाओ अब अभी आगे आप इस साइड आ जाओ so that the presentation can be visible from this side. up वहाँ लास्ट में है ना, you come forward. So let us move on to our technical session. I will invite first Mr. Salim Beg Sahab, State Convener, Indian National Trust for Art and Cultural Heritage, called in the name of INTACT. Sir, please come on the stage. हाँ बस ये है ना समझना. कौन सा सर ये और ऊपर थोड़ा और. Is it fine? ठीक है.
Is it visible? Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. At the outset, I'd like to compliment the Institution of Engineers for providing a platform on something which is very critically connected to, I would say, survival of habitation like ours. All these programs take an effort to organize. And I would request the participants, especially the students, to understand this. A lot of time and effort has gone from the Institute of Engineers, from the chairman and others, to organize this workshop. You people are also investing time. But let me frankly tell you, yesterday we had a wonderful presentation from JTRF. It was something which should have opened your eyes. But I got a feeling, maybe I'm not 100% correct on what I found in the students, was that you were sitting here by sufferance. आपको लगता था आपको मजबूरन यहाँ बिठाया गया है. Kindly participate at least if you don't speak, because हमारे एजुकेशन सेटअप में तो ये है ही नहीं कि स्टूडेंट उठ के सवाल करे. तो मगर कम से कम सुन तो लें with attention. Today also they have lined up 4 or 5 presentations. Please invest the time qualitatively. और थोड़ा थोड़ा जो आगे सीट्स वगैरह हैं वो भी ले लें, आपको कोई रोकता नहीं आगे आने में. तो अपना वक्त जब यहाँ आप गुजार रहे हैं तो उस वक्त की कदर करें और उस एफर्ट की कदर करें जो इंस्टीट्यूशन ने आपके लिए या हम सबों के लिए किया हुआ है. एनीवे, आई डोंट हैव समथिंग वेरी एक्साइटिंग टू टेल यू. व्हेन आई हर्ड अबाउट दिस वर्कशॉप, आई ऑलरेडी हैड वर्कड ऑन समथिंग टू रिविजिट one of the disasters which is in our recent memory. उस वक्त हम सोच क्या रहे थे, हो क्या गया. It's not that this disaster was visiting Kashmir for the first time, except that the magnitude was very high. But God forbid, अगर ऐसा disaster half the magnitude पर भी आ जाता, I don't think we would have been better prepared. So there's a reason for this. In my understanding, the reason is that we had a long gap of last flood and this flood, तो हम भूल गए थे. और ये हमारी पब्लिक मेमोरी में ही नहीं था कि हम भूल गए थे, इंस्टीट्यूशनल मेमोरीज में भी भूल गए थे, डिपार्टमेंट्स में भूल गए थे. यहाँ मदनी साहब बैठे हैं, इज अ वेटरन ऑफ द होल सेटअप. मुझे याद है इन 70s अप्रैल के महीने में डीसी साहब ऑर्डर निकालते थे कि फ्लड प्रोटेक्शन कमेटी हर डिस्ट्रिक्ट में बनेगी, और फ्लड प्रोटेक्शन कमेटी के मेंबर सेक्रेटरी एग्जैक्ट में हाइड्रोलिक होता हूँ दिनों मेरे ख्याल में, इरिगेशन फ्लड कंट्रोल वट एवर. एससी बाद में आ गए थे. 70s में हर डिस्ट्रिक्ट में एससी मेरे ख्याल में नहीं था इंजीनियर्स में. आई थिंक उसमें तो कहने का मतलब है कि प्रिपेयर्डनेस डिफरेंट थी. हमारे पास उतने साधन नहीं थे, बट एज एन ऑर्गेनाइजेशन एंड इंस्टीट्यूशन ऑफ द स्टेट मशीनरी वन थॉट दैट बिकॉज ऑनसेट ऑफ अप्रैल बारिशें बढ़ जाती हैं, सैलाब भी आ सकता है. The last flood, we were really caught unawares. And my presentation would revolve around certain aspects of 2014, but it's slightly broader than 2014. We are not the only place which is facing floods. In the recent past, in the last 10 years, we had a flood in Ladakh, we had flood in Uttarakhand, we had flood in Kashmir, we had flood in Chennai, we had flood in Kerala. Except for a better degree, Kerala floods. In all other 5 floods, the situation of the response was almost the same, except for Kerala. I went immediately after floods. I found that they were comparatively better prepared. ये वो floods हैं जो अचानक भी आ गए, बहुत ज़्यादा भी थे. And these floods did bring up this issue of unpreparedness of institutions who are supposed to tackle floods as a disaster. We also found in our flood that we also had lost the understanding of the floods. We had also, as I said, lacked in response also in mitigation. It took us a lot of time. I remember the chief minister of that time, Umar Abdullah, saying that for the first 2 days of the floods, I was not able to contact a single officer in my administration. It was the late second day I talked to my chief secretary. अब डिजास्टर का सबसे इंपॉर्टेंट क्रिटिकल इशू होता है रेस्पॉन्स. द डिजास्टर इंपैक्ट इज मोस्ट सीवियर इन द फर्स्ट 4-5 hours. उसके बाद सबसाइड हो जाता है. If this was the level of response or level of preparedness, you can understand what havoc it would have played. Like Iftikhar Kakru Sahab very rightly said yesterday that it was a blessing of the God. ये कोई कुदरत का करिश्मा था, ह्यूमन लॉसेस कम हो गए उस फ्लड से. अदरवाइज द इम्पैक्ट एंड द स्केल ऑफ फ्लड वाज सच दैट इट कुड हैव क्रिएटेड अ मच बिगर डिजास्टर. This doesn't directly pertain to the flood, but this is something which is very important for people like me, and it should be important for people like you. We have somehow in our memory thought that this river Jhelum is an adversary to us. ये तूफान सैलाब लेके तबाही करता है. To an extent ये अब हमारे साइकी में भी चला गया है कि ये तबाहियां दरियाओं की वजह से होती हैं. So just to flag this issue, I thought we should also talk what a river is actually. River is not just floods. And for a place like Kashmir, which is a bowl, how important the rivers are. तो ये general data है, source कहाँ है, gradient कितना है. Gradient is very important. Yesterday we talked about this alternate flood channel of Dogripora. The gradient is a big issue there, and I hope the senior engineers here would be having a better understanding than people like me. कि 113 किलोमीटर में 18 मीटर का gradient है, which means कि ये पानी is almost static in flow, almost static in flow. What is the significance of this river, who we think is only bringing disasters to us? गांव वगैरह में तो डिजास्टर ही समझते हैं, शहर में एक और इशू भी है. People have disconnected themselves from the river. We did in 2013 a survey of Srinagar city of 14 mohallas of downtown. And one of the questions in the survey was that how do you relate yourself to the river? Because we know this city is because of this river. And this city developed, expanded, grew because of Jhelum River. Most of the references were that answers were that they don't think it's very important for Srinagar. They only thought that ये बहुत गंदगी फैलाता है. So we have also forgotten about the significance of the river. So I thought we should touch on this issue of significance of the river. वो तो खैर that has physically happened. So please understand what this river means to us beyond floods. It's a lifeline of our cultural and economic systems. It plays very key role in our built heritage with structures on the banks, especially in a city like Cylinder. It also drains your natural water, which comes from the tributaries. I'll touch on that as well. You know, आपका agriculture का irrigation इस दरिया पर है. It has also been our transport. This was the only highway till late 19th century for Kashmir. All goods and services move via river, which means that it also had a lot of economic importance. And if you have seen the Srinagar, you would have seen the cultural and architectural heritage of mosques, gardens, bridge, etc. on the river. Now, what are the challenges of this river? One of the challenges, urbanization बहुत फैल रहा है, which has also resulted in many cases impacting on the river itself. Pollution, दरिया में बहुत आ गया है. Climate change, as you know, has impacted water bodies, including our river. And because of the impact on river, we have also found that our wetlands have been impacted. What all has been happening for conservation and restoration efforts? We know state government का अपना एक रोल है जो वो कर रही है. कुछ NGOs भी आगे आ गए हैं. Awareness campaign भी कहीं कहीं हो रहा है for tourism and other things. Wetlands के बारे में भी बातें हो रही है. So there are a lot of noises also, which are positively impacting our understanding of this river. Now let's come to the floods. As was yesterday mentioned, that this flood was extreme of the extreme floods, or extreme of the extreme floods faced by Kashmir. I don't know about these figures, we have got it from somewhere, so the real situation would be perhaps closer to this, that we had a discharge availability of 35,000 cusecs, we got 1,35,000 cusecs. So that would be the impact of the flood. Maybe figures slightly vary, but yeah, so that was the position. You know, after this flood,
1903 was the worst, when Srinagar city got submerged for 2 months.
My God. Yesterday we talked about the losses. I know when this flood took place, Iftikhar Sahab was perhaps also involved in this, an immediate loss assessment was made by the state government. And this proposal was submitted to World Bank. We finally ended up into a World Bank JTRF project. Okay, whatever. So we know what we are talking about. The official communication from the state government stated that about 1 lakh crores is our loss, which is 115% of the GDP of 1 year of Jammu and Kashmir state. And that time state was quite big. We also said, the state government also said that 2.4 lakh structures were damaged. And at that point in time, as of now, I think November में submit हुआ था loss assessment. The rehabilitation cost of this flood was pegged at 44,000 crores. This is the understanding, as I said, as of 2014, immediately after the flood. This is official statistics, right or wrong. As we know, this happened because of the river. The floods were carried through the river. As I said, river is very important to us. This is again some detail about its culture, heritage, economy, which we talked in some detail earlier on. But this is not just one river which is needs to be looked at. This river is basically a combination of many other tributaries. Main tributaries in the south are Arpal, Bringi, and Sandra main. Then we have subordinate, yeah, subordinate downstream tributaries which add to the water budget of the river. I don't need to read all these. Now, this is a map of Kashmir which shows these tributaries. Okay, sharing kya ho raha hai isme? Okay. Essentially, the purpose of this particular map is to show you that it's not the river, it's not the tributary, it's the catchment area which is critical when you look at the rivers or look at the floods per se. अगर आप देखेंगे गौर से ये कश्मीर वैली ना एक बाउल जैसा है. इट्स लाइक दिस. अगर आपके घर में भी कोई ऐसा स्ट्रक्चर हो जो यहाँ से भी पानी आए, यहाँ से पानी है, so impact level is this. So this is the level which takes the flood. This river takes about 24 tributaries up to the north or northwest जो इसका flow है. और हर tributary पानी ही साथ लाती है. Fortunately for us, these tributaries have been identified. They are perennial. And the catchments have been defined and captioned. We know there's a Vishav, Rembiara, Romshi, और हर का अपना catchment designed and drawn है. ये एक जनरल सा मैप है जो आपको ये बता देगा कि ये यूएस आर्मी के मैप्स बड़े स्टैंडर्ड मैप्स होते हैं, आपने भी देखा होगा. तो they have also mapped Kashmir for whatever purpose, and they only tell you the various levels above sea levels of the valley. Again, this is linked with the catchment areas, which we will subsequently see. And I'm sure the geographers here would understand this better than us. I am emphasizing on these catchments and showing you these couple of maps to tell you that don't look at the river or don't look at the river only, also look at the catchment. So these show you the network of rivers which are linked with the main river, जिसको आप झेलम कहते हैं. Now, if you historically look at the river, how did it figure, or look at the flood, or look at the water, especially about Srinagar city? What was our collective memory about Srinagar? The collective memory about historically and culturally about Srinagar was that it's a watery city. पानी बहुत है. 1870s में एक मैप बनाया गया था for whatever purpose. एक कानी शॉल है जो आपने सुना होगा. So somebody wanted to present this shawl to, वो तो कहानी गलत है, मगर लेजेंड ये है कि महाराजा प्रताप सिंह ने कहा मलिका विक्टोरिया को हम कोई गिफ्ट देंगे. So he ordered or commissioned कानी shawls on which map of Srinagar would be drawn. So ये एक shawl आपके सामने है. If you see these blue parts, सारा पानी है. Which means even in 19th century, when we thought of Srinagar, we thought of more water, less land. Now, what was this water? This water was lakes, this water was marsh, this water was wetland, this water was also the river and the canals. So, हमारी collective memory में पानी ही था. It's not that suddenly यहाँ पानी आ गया, दाएं बाएं फैल गया. We understood historically that the place would have, the city would have existed along with all these 4 or 5 watery areas, as I said, marsh, wetland, whatever. We talked about its status as bowl. Huh? So this map will tell you इस bowl में पानी कहाँ से गुजरता है. अब ये जो आपको वो कहाँ गया जी पॉइंटर? चलो, doesn't matter. टेंशन जरूरत है. ये जो ब्रॉडेस्ट एरिया आपको पानी का लग रहा है, कर्सर पर हटाओ आने से। हाँ, ये देखिए, ये प्लेन्स ऑफ कश्मीर है और यही प्लेन जो है ये सैलाब से इम्पैक्ट हो जाता है। Incidentally, this part is Srinagar, and this is the widest part. In fact, that is the reason why this city was established in this location. Why not in other locations? ये तो 113 किलोमीटर का प्लेन एरिया है, यहीं पर शहर क्यों बन गया? शहर इसलिए बन गया, this was the widest in the basin. वो आपको ये मैप भी दिखा लेता है कि widest in the basin था। Now we talked about Srinagar as a water city. तो what was this water about? आपके लेफ्ट साइड पर 1911 का मैप है, which shows the wetlands of Srinagar. And for you, the most important thing to see is the interconnectivity of water bodies here. The first water body from Narkara goes up to Hattalung and it is linked. है ना? If you go to the 2012 map, ये मेरे ख्याल में आपका ही फ्लड कंट्रोल वालों का ही, it shows remote sensing का होगा, it shows these water bodies have been filled, converted into land, and it has been delinked. Now open spaces are the land, the spaces with blue are the lakes, spaces with dots are the wetlands and marsh. Now you see how much change in 100 years took place in a place like Srinagar. All these wetlands basically exist mostly in the name or in a depleted form. In an ideal situation, we are still in a position to restore them. In an ideal situation. अब ये जो floods, as I said, I'm emphasizing this for a particular reason. The reason is that there's nothing new about floods, and we should always factor in this Kashmir में कभी भी सैलाब आ सकता है. This is the list of floods which have been historically recorded somewhere from BC, which is more in the mythology, and even our mythological texts mention about the floods. फिर अभी जैसे मन्नी साहब फरमा रहे थे 1903 वाला बाकी सैलाब का नहीं है, कहने का मतलब है कि it's not something which happened abruptly here. It's not something which happened in 2014 or 1903. The floods were always there. What happened subsequently during 2014 was unpreparedness of this system. These are the areas where Jhelum in Srinagar city faced these breaches, and that's how Srinagar city was impacted. For engineers, what we should note is that essentially the breaches have taken place at curves. And this is one area which, if I remember correctly, ये जो hydraulic division था irrigation flood control department का, ये breaches को बड़ा handle, ये curves को बड़ा handle कर, flood protection works वहीं से शुरू हो जाती थी. And even now those flood protection works are existing, which means that we had an understanding of what happened that day. If only we had acted in time, Srinagar city would have been substantially secured. अब ये मैप आपको थोड़ा अंदाजा दे देगा, ये जो नॉर्मल रेनफॉल हुआ, बट उससे ज्यादा इंपॉर्टेंट इसमें ये है कि this is a normal kind of spread of water bodies of river pre-floods. When floods took place, you could see the water flow. कितना फैल गया है. We have this advantage of having very high degree mapped data with us, and that is how it helps in understanding the floods. Now, this is not something new, but yesterday also this slide was shown, or a similar slide was shown. You can see what was the steep. It included all our strategic information, infrastructure, critical infrastructure, cultural infrastructure, everything. And it was all submerged. You can see that. This again is something which happened in the floods. Now, what our experts have been saying that water did not change its course. पानी तो वहीं चला गया जहां हमेशा ये चला जाता था. There was nothing new or fresh encroachment of water on the land. What had happened is that we built where earlier on water used to go. तो हमने वहां जगह बना ली जहां पहले जगह नहीं थी, तो पानी वहां चला जाता. These were our flood sinks. So we filled up our flood sinks. And this is an area which, say, as of 1911 map would have been a wetland, or would have been a water marsh, or would have been a flood sink. अब वहां मकान बने हैं. The same thing happens here. Housing colonies have come up in wetlands. People have built houses in wetlands. Governmental infrastructure has come up in wetlands. This is the devastation of Srinagar city in floods. The most unfortunate part of the floods at that point in time, as I said, was evacuation of people. We didn't know how to bring people out of the places which had been overtaken by floods. So people used all kinds of facilities. These are the trucks which are not meant for evacuating people. I mean, there could be a breakdown of a truck. This is the most dangerous and the most unscientific way of evacuating people. कि पानी में आप ट्रक घुसा लेते हैं without knowing that the truck itself would submerge. You can see these boats around. कैसे कैसे लोगों को निकाला जा रहा था. I am showing only some slides, and you would perhaps want to know more about it, which I don't have. We did an exercise on the impact of floods on cultural assets, which also includes our architecture because of these floods. हमारा ये specific एक program था 2014 में. Therefore, most of the information revolves around about traditional architecture, museums, and other things. But there are much better stories which perhaps experts sitting here would be able to tell you. ये एक एरिया है जो 40s 50s में बना था, और ये सोच के बना था कि ये मकान जो हैं ये ठीक मकान हैं, ये पुराने पाहिरछनीम के ये प्रॉपरली बिल्ट हाउसेस हैं, इनको कोई खतरा नहीं है. और जब प्रॉपरली बिल्ट हाउस का मतलब होता है इसमें मिक्स ऑफ कंक्रीट होगा, टिम्बर होगा, और secure and safe housing जिसको हम कहते हैं. As of 40s and 50s, our engineers will tell you, we thought this kind of a construction would save us from these disasters. So this is Shivpora area, which was a completely fresh area. These are these bunds जो हमने बड़े कामयाबी से बनाए थे, खूब ये सोच के बनाए थे कि ये बंद हमको बचा लेंगे, तो बंड्स पर गाड़ियां घुस रही हैं. This is one of the most iconic buildings we had in Srinagar was this आबी गुजर, जो गुजरवान जहां रहते हैं वहां टैक्स कलेक्शन की एक बिल्डिंग थी, बिल्कुल गिर गई सामने. आई एम सॉरी, आई डोंट हैव द बिफोर photograph, then you would have realized what damage this is. ये जवाहर नगर है. जवाहर नगर is a housing colony which was built post independence, and obviously all the expertise we had at that point in time also factored in disasters. Jawahar Nagar, incidentally, is the only colony in North India where a house either faces a park or there's a park on the rear. इतना अच्छा बनाया गया था जब भी बनाया गया था, और ये सोच के ऑब्वियसली बनाया गया होगा इसमें कोई सैलाब आएगा, बाकी चीजें आएगा, भूचाल आएगा, कोई भी डिजास्टर. बिकॉज फॉर ए आर्किटेक्ट और फॉर ए इंजीनियर द फर्स्ट कंसर्न क्या होता है? द हाउस शुड बी गुड, सेफ, सिक्योर एंड लिवेबल. यही तीन चीजें हैं ना. ऑब्वियसली ये चीजें सोची हुई होंगी. अब देखिए इन मकानों की क्या हालत हो गई, आपके सामने है. क्रैक्स हो गए, गिर गए. This again is Jawahar Nagar. Most of these areas turned to rubble. मतलब हमने उस वक्त मकान तो बनाया, ये सोचा नहीं कि what will happen if this house faces a flood. ये आबी गुजर का एरिया है. This is Kursuraj Bagh. This is Shivpora. शिवपोरा गांव विषम में ऊपर कुलगाम साइड में. Again, somewhere in Kulgam, कुलगाम में ही विशव इज द मोस्ट फेरोशियस रिवर इन कश्मीर और ए ट्रिब्यूटरी, मोस्ट फेरोशियस। विशव बहुत तबाही कर लेता है, साल भर इसमें पानी नहीं रहता है उतना, मगर जब सैलाब आ जाता है तो दिस इज समथिंग विच रियली टेक्स योर माइंड ऑफ। वी हैव अ म्यूजियम हियर। अब आप, हम बड़ी बातें कह रहे हैं शहर बचाने की। व्हाट इज अ म्यूजियम? म्यूजियम इज अ प्लेस जहां आप हिस्टोरिक प्रोडक्ट्स रखते हैं, आइटम्स रखते हैं, आर्टिफैक्ट्स रखते हैं। अब आपके पास आर्टिफैक्ट ऐसा है जो 1000 साल पुराना है, 500 साल पुराना है, 400 साल पुराना है। अब आपके पास अगर 400 साल पुरानी चीज है तो आपको पहला ख्याल क्या रखना है? इसको बचाना है। दैट इज व्हाई इट इज विद यू एंड यू हैव टू बी प्रिपेयर्ड कि ये चीज अगर कल को कोई तबाही हो गई, भूचाल आ गया, आग लग गई, तो इसका प्रोटेक्शन का हमारे पास साधन क्या है? सो फॉर अ म्यूजियम पर्सन द फर्स्ट थिंग while he builds a museum is that how can I protect it permanently और perpetually कि ये खराब कुछ भी हो, ये म्यूजियम की चीज खराब नहीं होनी चाहिए। इसीलिए तो म्यूजियम है। वरना जिस आदमी के पास, मेरे घर में शॉल है तो है, सैलाब या आग लग गई तो खत्म हो गया, बट म्यूजियम कांट अफोर्ड दैट। सी व्हाट वाज द प्रिपेयर्डनेस ऑफ म्यूजियम। ये म्यूजियम की बिल्डिंग है, ये म्यूजियम की हिस्टोरिक कंटेक्स्ट की है, डोंट नीड टू टेल यू दिस। दिस इज द एलिवेशन ऑफ द म्यूजियम। अब देखिए पानी आ गया म्यूजियम में, बिल्डिंग का हाल आप देख ही रहे हैं क्या हुआ। ऑल आई एम श्योर नथिंग कुड हैव बीन डन अबाउट इट। जो अब मैं आपको दिखा रहा हूं ये तो होना ही था, बट नाउ आई विल टेक यू टू अदर पार्ट्स। अब आपके पास मैनस्क्रिप्ट है, मैनस्क्रिप्ट पानी में चले गए और इस हालत में थे when we visited this museum on 7th or 8th of, नहीं 9th or 10th of, क्यों जब 9th और 10th of सितंबर होगा 2014, ऐसे बिखरे हुए थे, पेंटिंग्स ऐसे बिखरी हुई थी। वो चाहिए। Do you know what are these? These are skeletons. These are bones of animals, and each artifact, each specimen would be 1000 year old. अब हालत इसकी देखिए क्या है, क्या हो गई। ये प्रिपेयर्डनेस थी हमारी, हमने घर अपने से बेहतर बचाए होंगे। ये देखिए, दिस इज व्हाट हैड हैपेंड टू दीज आर्टिफैक्ट्स। दिस इज अ शॉल। अब देखिए पानी से ये शॉल कोई 150-200 साल पुराना होगा और ये हमेशा के लिए अब खत्म हो गया, बिकॉज इट हैज बीन स्टेन्ड विद मड वाटर। देयर इज नो वे बाय विच यू कैन रिक्लेम दीज प्रोडक्ट्स। आपको पता है वहां एक नेचुरल हिस्ट्री का एक पोर्शन होता था एसपीएस म्यूजियम में पहले, व्हेन यू वुड एंटर। तुम जानवर क्या हाल, वो जो साइड्स पर आप देख रहे हैं ना, वो लाल लाल, these are a textile, these are a कानी shawls। लेबल इसका लिखा है 400 years old, 300 years old। हालत देखिए कैसे हुई। ये भी मेरे ख्याल में शॉल ही था। एनीवे, कहने का मतलब है कि हम तो बात कर रहे हैं गांव मोहल्ले बचाने की। ये एक इंस्टीट्यूशन में जहां हमारा 2500 साल पुराना कल्चरल हेरिटेज प्रिजर्व होना है, उसकी हालत देखिए। दिस इज द लेवल ऑफ प्रिपेयर्डनेस। Anyway, let's go beyond this. Yes, this is an issue which I would like to highlight. We mentioned about tributaries. You can see these catchment areas of the Jhelum Basin. इतने ये सारे catchment areas हैं। So essentially ये पानी जो आपके पास सैलाब की सूरत में आता है, यहाँ से आता है, और इसमें से पानी का रन इतना ज्यादा और अगर कम होगा वो डिटरमिन करेगा आपका flood level. If you are able to hold water in catchments, if you maintain your catchments at a gradable level, आपका water flow slow हो जाएगा। और water flow slow होने का क्या फायदा है कि दरिया में abruptly water discharge नहीं होगा। और what will happen if abruptly discharge is tackled? flood का impact कम होगा, है ना। ये बेसिक बात है। अगर सैलाब जहलम में है तो ट्रिब्यूटरी का हिस्सा, अगर ट्रिब्यूटरी में पानी है वो इसलिए है कि कैचमेंट से आता। अगर कैचमेंट आपका बड़ा अच्छा है, कंपैक्ट है, फॉरेस्टेड है, ग्रीन कवर है, तो पानी आहिस्ता, पहले पानी वहीं एब्जॉर्ब होगा, तो डिलेड रिस्पॉन्स होगा। नॉट दैट पानी ये खत्म करेगा, व्हाट इट विल डू इज कि ये पानी का फ्लो रेस्ट्रेन करेगा। जो चीज 2 दिन में नीचे आ जाती है वो 5 दिन में आ जाएगी। 5 दिन में आने से स्लो डिस्चार्ज में एडवांटेज होता है, इम्पैक्ट कम होता है। अच्छा, अब मैं आपको जब अभी फॉरेस्ट की बात करते हैं, आई डोंट हैव डेटा ऑन ईच कैचमेंट किसमें क्या हाल है। आई एम श्योर ये जो कल एक बहुत अच्छी प्रेजेंटेशन आपको दिखाई गई उसमें ये उन्होंने कहीं ना कहीं फैक्टर इन किया होगा डेटा, बट आई वाज लुकिंग एट अ लार्जर पिक्चर। क्या है हमारे यहाँ 7,800 स्क्वायर किलोमीटर का फॉरेस्ट है। मैं कश्मीर की बात कर रहा हूँ। दिस डेटा विच इज इन पब्लिक डोमेन, फॉरेस्ट सर्वे ऑफ इंडिया का डेटा है। इसमें आपके पास जो आपका ग्रेडेड फॉरेस्ट कैचमेंट एरियाज का होना चाहिए, दैट हैज टू बी वेरी डेंस, दैट इज ओनली 27%। मुझे लगता है ये जो उन्होंने क्लासिफिकेशन की है, दिस हैज बीन डन वेरी जेनरसली एंड लूजली। हालत इससे भी खराब होगी क्योंकि इसमें वो पैचेस नहीं है जहां बिल्कुल डिग्रेडेशन हो गया है या डिप्लीशन हुआ है। अब दिस will tell you there's a term called open forest which is 41%. Do you know what is open forest? में एक बात मैं आपको बता दूं, फॉरेस्ट कभी खत्म नहीं होता, कागज में फॉरेस्ट कभी खत्म नहीं हो सकता। once a forest always a forest. वहां दरख्त है कि नहीं, forest is not in our administrative records defined by the number of trees it has. Forest is defined by a map which at some point in time in history was declared as a forest. अगर वहां दरख्त नहीं है तो उसका भी एक क्लासिफिकेशन है, एंड दैट क्लासिफिकेशन इज दैट इज ओपन फॉरेस्ट। मतलब वहां कुछ भी नहीं है मगर फॉरेस्ट एरिया है। सो नोबडी कैन गो एंड बिल्ड अ कैनाल देयर, nobody can go and build a road. If it builds, then it has to come under a different approval process, and that approval process he has to plant double the number of trees as a compensation. तो anyway, आपका 41% फॉरेस्ट जो है वो ओपन फॉरेस्ट है, विच मीन्स नो फॉरेस्ट एरिया, नो ट्री एरिया है, नॉट द फॉरेस्ट एरिया। एंड जो आपका रिक्वायरमेंट है फॉर अ फ्लड एरिया, नॉट फॉर द जनरल फॉरेस्ट। जनरल फॉरेस्ट मॉडरेट और लेस डेंस होगा तो चल लेगा, मगर अगर कैचमेंट ट्रीट करना है देन इट हैज टू बी अ वेरी डेंस फॉरेस्ट। जो भी बात हम समझा रहा था मैं आपको, वो आपके पास सिर्फ 27% है। So 73% of the risk is enhanced where? In the catchments. And 73% of the risk by this proportion can be controlled if you are able to handle the catchment area. Now let's go to this major flood sink which is Wooler. Time ago? Okay. Wooler आपका सिंक है बेसिकली। वुलर करता क्या है, जहलम का पानी वहां चला जाता है, इट बिकम्स अ स्टोर हाउस ऑफ वाटर। क्योंकि आपका पानी जो है जहलम का, इट एट वन पॉइंट टर्मिनेट्स इन द वुलर। अब वुलर का भी आप डेटा देख लें, कहीं होगा। हाँ, 1911 में इट वाज 217 स्क्वायर किलोमीटर्स, जिसमें 58 स्क्वायर किलोमीटर मार्च था। आज आपका प्रॉब्लम ये है कि as of today or as of 2014 it was reduced by 45% in the lake area due to conversion in 28. We had a government scheme जिसको वो सोनवारी बंद जिसको कहते हैं, आप बानियारी बंद जिसको कहते हैं, बानियारी बंद रिजल्ट इन द लॉस ऑफ 28% ऑफ वुलर एरिया जो कन्वर्ट हो गया इन लैंड। उसके बाद प्लांटेशन वगैरह। सो हाउ मच वाज रिड्यूस्ड बाय 70%। अब ये ब्लड मॉनिटरिंग सिस्टम्स आपके पास हैं ही, तो मैं रेस्क्यू पर आऊंगा कि अगर लोकल वॉलंटियर ना होते कश्मीर में तो क्या होता। जो कल इफ्तिखार साहब बता रहे थे ना, अल्लाह की मेहरबानी थी। अल्लाह की मेहरबानी इसमें नहीं थी कि हम तूफान से बच गए, अल्लाह की मेहरबानी इसलिए थी कि रेजिलेंस था कश्मीर में। आई नो पीपल फ्रॉम कहां से आ गए वो श्रीनगर में वॉलंटियरिंग के लिए पहले 10 दिन में। वो थी मेहरबानी अल्लाह की, और कोई मेहरबानी अल्लाह की नहीं थी। हम इसलिए बच गए, लोग बचाने के लिए आ गए, ये याद रखें। पहले 4-5 दिन में कभी पता नहीं था क्या हो रहा था, कहां से लोग आ गए कंधों में लेके। थैंक्स टू द एयरलाइंस, उन्होंने बोट शिप किए, ये प्लास्टिक बोट्स, जहां पता नहीं था। मैंने उन दिनों में कहीं इलाहाबाद गया हुआ था, वहां भी मैंने कश्मीरी लड़के देखे, वो बोट ढूंढ रहे थे, बिकॉज इलाहाबाद में राफ्टिंग होती है, इस पर ना गंगा पर गए थे। अननोन बॉयज एंड गर्ल्स जिनका कश्मीर से कोई ताल्लुक नहीं, फ्लड से कोई ताल्लुक नहीं, उनको पता था वहां क्राइसिस है, लोग मर रहे हैं, मकानों में घुसे हुए हैं, उन्होंने ये बोट खरीदे। जो कल बताया गया था कि बोट्स कितने बच गए हैं, सी हाउ पीपल हैव बीन सिक्योर्ड। यहाँ पे सरकार का चेहरा नहीं नजर रहा आ रहा आपको, ये लोग, ये देयर आर अनसंग हीरोज, ये पता ही नहीं कहाँ है। ये देखिए किस किस में इनोवेशन है, ट्रैक्टर्स लाइक जो भी किया। उसके बाद मैं, लेट मी क्लोज ऑन दिस नाउ, व्हाट हैपेंड वाज एक इमीडिएट कंसर्न, वी एज ऑर्गेनाइजेशन इंटैक को ये इमीडिएटली आ गया कि अब मकान फ्लड तो रिसीड हो गया, नाउ देयर आर हाउसेस, किसी का घर है, वो अंदर कैसे चला जाए? देयर वाज नो इंस्ट्रक्शन टू टेल पीपल आप अंदर कैसे जाएंगे। सो व्हाट वी डिड वाज वी प्रिपेयर्ड मैनुअल्स, दीज आर द मैनुअल्स, कि जब आप एंटर करेंगे तो कैसे करेंगे एंटर। आपके पास हेलमेट होना चाहिए, फेस मास्क होना चाहिए, फ्लैश लाइट होनी चाहिए, एंड वी केप्ट दिस अवेलेबल एंड डिस्ट्रीब्यूटेड इन द पीपल कि क्या करेंगे आप अंदर जाके। आप जाएंगे पहले मेजर स्ट्रक्चर, कोई तमाशा बसा कुछ लाभ प्योमस के प्योमदिकम, तो बेसिक स्ट्रक्चर। प्रॉब्लम ये था कि उन दिनों लोगों को बेचारों को पता नहीं था क्या करेंगे। अब जिसका घर था अंदर सामान पड़ा, व्हाट वुड ही डू? हिज फर्स्ट इंपल्स वुड बी टू एंटर द हाउस, which would have resulted in substantial disaster. So what we did these manuals. इसमें क्रिटिकल बात ये है कि अब लोगों को कहाँ पता चलेगा मैनुअल बना है। We thought we will use established communication channels, उस वक्त दो थे यहाँ, एक रेडियो कश्मीर, एक दूरदर्शन। रेडियो कश्मीर भी बंद था पानी में, दूरदर्शन भी पानी में। Luckily what Radio Kashmir did, and we must compliment them for that, they shifted a transformer from somewhere and placed it near Narwal. वो एरिया पानी से बच गया था, तो वी रश थे, तो उनको दिखाया था। उन्होंने 2 दिन ये प्रोग्राम चलाए, अंदर जाएंगे तो पहले क्रैक देखें, सिर में टोपी, थिंग्स लाइक दैट। तो उस वक्त हमको ये भी नहीं पता था कि अगर ये लोग बेचारे गरीब लोग हैं, ये अपनी जायदाद बचाने के लिए तो जाएंगे मकान में, ये मर जाएंगे अंदर। तो इवन दीज इंस्ट्रक्शंस वर नॉट फॉलोड और अलाउड टू बी डिसेमिनेटेड बिफोर फ्लड्स। फिर डॉक्यूमेंटेशन वगैरह की बात है, दिस शुड नॉट इंटरेस्ट यू ऑल। सो हमने 3 स्टेप कहा था। द फर्स्ट स्टेप वुड बी चेक द बिल्डिंग फ्रॉम आउटसाइड, सेकंड स्टेप वुड बी चेक एंड क्लीन अप, द थर्ड स्टेप वुड बी फिर एक्सपर्ट देखिए ये गिर गया, इसको ठीक भी करना है। अब ये जनरल टाइम कम है, आई डोंट वांट टू डिस्कस बिकॉज दिस इज समथिंग व्हिच नीड्स टू बी डिस्कस कि टेक्नोलॉजी कम्युनिकेशन का क्या है। द ओनली गुड न्यूज इज कि कल यहाँ आके हमें पता चला कि अंडर दिस जहरम तवी रिहैबिलिटेशन प्रोजेक्ट एक अच्छा काम हुआ है। That is the happiest news one has got over these years. But the issue is now, how do we transmit it, disseminate it, so that this data, this wealth of knowledge which has been created under this project is implemented and disseminated at the minute and hour of the need. That is something which is a concern for everybody, concern for us, concern for those who have created, and concern also for the state as an institution. So I'll not go into other details what come here. The idea is that you have to understand a disaster. You have not to respond to a disaster. अगर आप understand disaster करेंगे, many things can be mitigated. बड़े तूफान आ जाते हैं, उसमें क्या करेंगे आप? आप कल कह रहे थे बड़ा तूफान तो आ ही जाएगा। Your test is not that बड़ा तूफान आ गया और आप बच गए. Your test is that what all you did at the time when you could have responded in terms of pre-disaster preparedness and post-disaster preparedness. That is a challenge that the society and the administration has. Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
That time.
Thank you so much, sir, for taking us to the memory of floods. Come on. Sir's presentation. बस डाउनलोड करें सर्च ईमेल पठें ये रफी easy. No, easy. Notice. Yes, notice. I think what करिए कर presentation कितना बारी नहीं डाउन खुला दे बेटा करो Now I request Engineer Rafiq Ahmad Rafiq, former Chief Engineer, please come on the stage and deliver your talk, but be very precise as time is very less with us.
सर स्लाइड शो कीजिए प्लीज पीपीटी पे if you can do.
You can use see next year. Yeah, you can use this one as
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, esteemed guests and senior colleagues. Thank you for giving me an opportunity to be here to discuss. Actually, we have to understand this planning process. Planning process is actually, it starts with policies, then programs, then schemes, then plans, and then review and adaptation. Where does the engineer actually fall in this matrix? He falls actually in that plans and detailed execution. The problem lies somewhere else. So our planning process and our review and adaptation is such that it is basically output based. It's not outcome based. And actually, those system में जैसे आपके if you are basically required to do something, which is output based, so your concentration on risk informed planning is basically fails. It has to be incorporated at a policy level, and policies are basically framed on a political tenure basis. Then administrative tenures are very less, because I have experience as chief engineer. I have seen how people at the helm who really matter in making programs, schemes, and programs. Then we have to make engineers are finally to make detailed plans for execution, where the role of risk management, risk informed planning doesn't fall. I don't know where does engineer, because engineer is finally basically desired to give outputs, and then that output is measurable. It's only measurable. There you are basically just counting how many kilometers of roads you have done, how many bridges you have done, how many buildings you have done, but the outcome, what is the outcome out of these outputs? It's basically recently मुझे लगा कि जैसे last year our planning department started circulating some formats where they were asking us to show the outcome of each scheme, and then उसमें भी ऐसा ही हुआ कि वही दौड़ लगी जो हमारे पास दौड़ होती है numbers to fill the formats. तो उसमें भी nobody was really getting into the basics of what is outcome of a particular scheme or particular project. So actually that's why I have basically tried to put make a very topic out of the topic. I have tried to compare what is output based infrastructure planning against the outcome based. So actually, infrastructure development is it is a key to economic growth and social well-being. Outcome-based planning focuses on long-term benefits and like societal well-being, sustainability, and resilience. Output-based planning prioritizes short-term, quantifiable deliverables. This is basically the problem where it lies. Our political and education system is such where the emphasis is on output, and once you are basically concentrating on output, your this risk management, risk informed planning goes to the, it is basically dashed to the walls. It doesn't count, because finally you are reviewed, your performance is based on outputs, and once it is output based, you don't look. And I have seen how administrators also have why mera tenure kitna hai, is this scheme itne, because I have basically sometimes in meetings I have basically tried to give some ideas, because we are not involved in planning process. Let me be very frank. Even our reviews, the formats are being made by some people who are either politically or administratively in the position. So I don't want to mention, but I gave an idea to a particular bureaucrat, a very dynamic bureaucrat. He said, नहीं यार मुझे बताओ जो 2 साल में बनेगा, 2 साल में चीज दिखेगी. No, this is output based. And once this thing is basically addressed, our risk informed जो भी data है, जैसे हमारे पास कल भी data था, we have a data that we have to bell the cat, but who will bell the cat? That's the question. Engineers are not in position in the matrix of planning that they can bell the cat. They are finally in the matrix, they fall at the output point. So this is how. Now, objective of this my discussion will be highlighting risks of output-based planning and advantages of outcome-based approach. So this output-based planning, which is short-term measurable goals, number of bridges, roads, buildings, and outcome-based planning will basically concentrate on long-term societal benefits, which will basically take care of these risks. It will be, for example, improved mobility, sustainability. Now, then you have risks of output-based planning is that it's misaligned with priorities. It focuses on speed, volume rather than real-world needs. Your poor risk integration, that you don't fail to account for long-term risks like climate change, or say underutilization or overutilization of the outputs you are doing. Similarly, there will be a risk of resource misallocation. You will invest by misdirected, compromising the qualities. I have practically seen it. I have seen what is happening. We do something which is not utilized, or something which immediately becomes redundant because it was not conceived for an outcome based. So you have lack of stakeholders engagement. We don't engage people. We don't know their needs. Because once the people are engaged, you definitely will have, because unless you make them understand what is my objective. Objectives are, I have seldom seen people knowing what is the objective of a particular scheme or plan, what we are finally going to achieve. We have this another risk of short planning horizons. We ignore future adaptability and sustainability. The misaligned priorities, I say the problem is output based planning prioritizes quick visible results over long term. Example is infrastructure built on time but underutilized or mismatched to community needs. Then poor risk integration is that you fails to account for future risks, for the natural disasters, population growth. A bridge completed on budget but vulnerable to future flooding. Similarly, resource misallocation is that your challenges are that focuses on immediate deliverables, right? Leads to inefficiencies. Result is that you have finance and human resources are not optimized for long-term impact. Lack of stakeholders engagement means limited input from the communities of end users. Consequences are that infrastructure may be built without consideration of local needs, and then you find people resisting. Smart city is an example. We had to basically explain to people what is the objective. If you really explain to people, you will definitely find a support. You have in shortened planning horizon, emphasis is short-term objectives. Your facilities become obsolete or mislocated. As I said, they become this a waste of resources. The advantage of outcome-based planning is that it aligns with long-term gains, enhances safety, mobility, and sustainability. It incorporates future challenges of urbanization, growth, then maximizes long-term value through better allocation of resources. It enhances the stakeholders' engagement, and projects are become relevant. If we engage with people, our end users, it encourages future-proof designs and solutions. This is how ensure the result is that your infrastructure is more, if you basically engage them. The innovation is, designs are adaptable for future changes and demands. Uh, Similarly, I explained to you incorporation of risk management, then efficient use of resources. It will, if outcome-based planning will ensure that human resource, and maybe it will be in term, because our financial constraint planning process, they will only, will basically talk of your outputs. For example, yesterday some speaker said, वो फाइनेंस पीपल बेस से, यार इसमें आपको क्या मिलेगा, इस ये जो आप स्टडी करवाए उससे क्या मिलेगा, because they are actually concerned with numbers and something which is on ground, which is visible to people. But maybe that yesterday the study which have basically seen, it has taken our resource, financial, human, but it's not visible. It's not visible, but it has a greater long-term benefits. Again, now I have tabulated these aspects of here aspects, and then output and outcome-based planning process, right? So recommendation is that we have to basically, I don't know where do our engineers fall in, that we have to adopt outcome based planning. वही जैसे मैंने अभी भी कहा कि पिछले साल कुछ exercise हो गई थी, but who were at the helm I don't know, but the format which had come, it was very difficult to basically जो हमने आज हम execute कर रहे हैं projects, उनको they were basically, वो जब मेहता साहब के टाइम में there was a what is the outcome, because we never knew, because outcome तो plan पहले बनाने से पहले करते हैं ना, the things which were in execution, for every single irrelevant scheme also it was asked what is the outcome. So it was again wahi khana puri, again number game, output game. Those formats also became output games. So we have to incorporate future risks, as every speaker talks about the future risks. फ्यूचर रिस्क में कल हम डिस्कस कर रहे थे, फॉर एग्जांपल जो रोड लेवल की फ्रीज करने की बात है, उसमें हमारी कितने रिसोर्सेज जाते हैं, how much aggregate every year goes in the formation of roads, and how much formation level goes up, and how consequential resources from the private sector, who are finally the end users of our infrastructure, how much resource wastage is taking place. So these things always will take care if we have a policy framework. If we have a policy framework, then the programs are framed to look at the outcome, but rather than the output. Similarly, we have to involve communities and end users, because I personally, my experience is sitting with the people who have to finally use it, explain to them our objectives. Maybe initially the projects will face resistance, reluctance from the people to accept. But if an objective is very lucrative, if objective is for the better good and future sustainability, I'm sure that people finally they really want a change. They really want a change. Similarly, your long term, it will prioritize sustainable adaptive solutions, and long term, it will be long term instance. Then you have to encourage innovations. We have to basically come out of the beaten paths. Sometimes you have to basically make some things to change. It's not always, for example, I was yesterday also mentioning, we used to close macadamization process, say on 15th of every year. There used to be a circular. Last seminar also one speaker said 15 के बाद आप उनको रोक देते हैं. There's no, it's not a rule. So in my tenure for last 2 years, I never issued such circular. because there are innovations. You can use innovation and you can keep on working. I did a macadamia work a while bridge in February, because needs, you have to basically adapt to the needs. You cannot restrict the progress. Now, closing thoughts are risk-informed planning shifts the focus. You have to shift the focus from immediate output to comprehensive, future-oriented planning, and outcome-based approach balances current needs with long-term sustainability and resilience. Now, finally, sustainable development requires planning for generations to come. So we have to shift our thinking process from output to जो हमारे reviews होते हैं, we have to score points. We have our performance judged on output. So if our mindset changes from output, I think we will be able to make some changes. Thank you very much. If you have any questions.
सर मैं रफीक साहब से एक सवाल करना चाहता हूँ
We have session after lunch, so we'll be having a collective question asking session. Conversation, discussion, whatever. All the panelists will be included.
But please don't leak the paper.
So I want to thank Engineer Rafiq Sir for sharing his presentation with respect to the outcome based. So we need a planning where we must have all the projects to be implemented in outcome based manner so that we can have a sustainable development in our region as well. Now we have with us our keynote speaker, Dr. Parvez Ahmed. He is the head department of Geography and Disaster Management, University of Kashmir. He has over 2 decades of experience in bridging pure and applied sciences with social science, aligning with the interdisciplinary essence of geography. His research primarily focuses on applying remote sensing and GIS technologies to tackle complex environment and earth science issues, particularly in geomorphology, hydrology, glaciology, and climate studies. Concentrating on the Kashmir Himalayas, his work examines the interaction between upstream and downstream environmental impacts, employing geospatial technology for watershed scale modeling. His research explores climate data trends, investigating current and future weather patterns in the region, and he has contributed to sponsored studies on snow and glacier responses to climate change. His recent projects also encompass supervising postdoctoral research on soil micronutrient analysis and nitrogen loading, enhancing hydrological models for snow and glacier runoff estimation. His lab applies advanced numerical probabilistic and statistical modeling to climate dynamics, glacier behavior, sediment transport, and runoff estimation, fostering a holistic approach to man-environment relationship. So please come on the stage. So this was prepared. So I
So, good afternoon, Assalamu alaikum.
इसलिए देखिए तो मैं सोच रहा हूँ आपको हाँ skip
So,
करूँ
Jagdish sir was basically talking national research here, and it has nothing to do with the research. Great, sir. I was very happy that nobody asked for my profile. I'm a teacher. I think I'm audible.
Yes.
Okay, fine.
That is this.
So, unfortunately,
Yes, sir.
I was very happy that nobody asked for my profile, but I don't know, they must have downloaded for some.
So internet was a problem to us. So
Can you, if you
Yeah, okay, fine.
next answer you.
Some of my lecture must have been discussed yesterday also, because somebody must have really introduced the topic itself. So in fact, I was scheduled to give the lecture on the first day, then I made it second day. Maybe something might be basically replicated, but importantly, what is disaster risk? Disaster risk is expressed as the likelihood of loss of life, injury, or destruction and damage from a disaster in a given period of time. First of all, basically, we know that when we are talking about disaster management over the period of time, since last 25 years, a lot has changed as far as the definition of disaster management is concerned. Because now what we have done is that we have shifted from disaster management more vocally to disaster risk reduction. And over the period of time, what has happened that this has been a very big shift, because importantly, before 2000, what they generally used to do is they used to talk about a post-disaster scenario, where the approaches were basically primarily address the post-disaster. Disaster used to take place, and then we used to go for a post-disaster approaches. But what has happened is that after there were a number of initiatives which were taken at the global scale. For example, if we talk about Yokohama strategy, then we talk about Hygo framework for action, we talk about Sendai framework. And importantly, what we know is that Hygo framework for action was one major milestone, a major global approach. We basically addressed this problem of disaster risk reduction. And it was primarily induced to that we should basically talk about building resilience, where building resilience was one of the important, and that was Hygo framework for action from 2005 to 2015 for 10 years, where the focus was that not only we have to build resilience, but we have to link this risk with the sustainable development. Because importantly, since the Brundtland Commission came into existence and then came up with the definition of sustainable development, we know that man-environment relationship had been basically imbalanced. And this approach basically led to a number of problems, and particularly when we talk about disasters. We need to basically keep in mind, for me as an academician, a disaster is a disaster. Hazard is not necessarily a disaster. Keeping in mind that when we talk about a hazard, we know that if we take precautions, if these are taken, maybe a hazard would never change into a disaster. And when the hazard becomes a disaster, when it affects humans, when humans and settlements, infrastructure, anything related to humans is basically affected, then only is a disaster for us. And what we have seen in our perspective also, if you see this loss of life, injury, destruction, damage in a given period of time, but what has happened is that we have been facing disasters, and disasters over the period of time have basically affected humans at global scale, at the regional scale, and at the local scale. I would just give an example that if 2005 Indian Ocean tsunami would not have come, National Disaster Act of 2005 would not have come. It would not have come into existence, because it was primarily basically initiated by the Indian Ocean tsunami, when basically lakhs of people were stranded, loss of life happened, loss of infrastructure happened, and that basically induced that time. Kapil Sibal was the Minister for Science and Technology, who basically initiated it, that we need to basically put in point that we need to talk about disaster management. So National Disaster Act of 2005 came into existence and initiated by that Indian Ocean tsunami of 2005. That was the first year, because before that, what disaster was there, there were basically steps taken for that, but they were primarily an isolated state. There were a number of departments which were basically collaborating together and then come. So when National Disaster Act of 2005 came, after that, what happened, that it laid out a broad framework for a comprehensive disaster management policy. And that comprehensive disaster management policy said that we need to establish a National Disaster Management Authority, which would be headed by the Prime Minister of India, and it would be having a vice chairman who would be having a rank of a cabinet minister. And then there will be a number of members drawn from different academia, technocrats and other bureaucrats, and then within that system, there was a National Disaster Management Authority, there was a State Disaster Management Authority, and there was a District Disaster Management Authority. And that the three-tier system basically also meant that we had a specialized institution for capacity building, which was National Institute of Disaster Management. And within the act, it was that including National Institute of Disaster Management, each state would have, Union Territory and state would have its own State Institute of Disaster Management, SIDM. And then we have this. At the same time, there was a National Disaster Management Authority, a State Disaster Management Authority, and District Disaster Management Authority, which would be headed by the District Development Commissioner. But at the same time, we know that even if when the act was initiated, it was implemented, it was passed through the parliament, it became a law, it became an act, but still then much had not been done in from 2005 to 2020. In fact, no, there were basically isolated but comprehensive policy had not resulted in an overall change in the scenario. That can be basically gauged by this fact that National Disaster Management, State Disaster Management, when State Disaster Management came up, let me give a example of my own state. When there were two major there was one Kashmir earthquake of 2005 and then 2014 floods. And then before that, 2004 was a Waltingonar, the snow tsunami that took place. But importantly, what we need is that that time our DUCOM's office used to have a disaster management cell. So importantly, what happened when the Waltingonar happened, the most important thing happened that this disaster management cell was cut off from the iska communication link bhi cut gaya, uski light bhi cut gayi, and something. So the disaster management cell, which was basically meant to provide relief and provide this assistance to us, basically it collapsed. The system couldn't run. And then we had a State Disaster Management Authority. Okay, fine. And then each district would have its disaster management authority. I would just give you an example. We were having a session, we were having a seminar in Kashmir University, and one of my friends who that time he was my senior at, basically I'm a product of Jamia University, Delhi. So one of my seniors there, he was from mass communications and basically he was heading a district, was a district development commissioner in one of the districts. So he was there, he was just strolling in the university somehow. So it was not a working day. He was strolling there. He saw there's a seminar going on. He just came in, and then when a speaker was basically delivering a lecture, he mentioned that there is a district disaster management authority. There's a three-tier structure: NDMA, SDMA, and DDMA. And he was basically surprised, and he shared it with me. Parvez, DDMA का जो chairman होता है वो district development commissioner होता है, because it was he. And he was not even knowing that he is the chairman of the Disaster Management Authority. This is the height of the thing. You can imagine that at the ground level, when he doesn't know, maybe the system is like that. We have not been able to basically apprise them about it. And then when the bureaucrats are not themselves apprised, you don't expect much to them, much as far as their awareness, sensitizing people, capacity building, initiating capacity building programs. But okay, fine. Over the period of time, what has happened is, yes, then at the same time, we established a District Disaster Management Authority, and with the state established a Department of Disaster Management and RRR, Relief, Rehabilitation and Reconstruction. And that was established just 10 years back, but at this point of time, still, they don't have even a single permanent employee. You don't have a single permanent employee. And you know, at the same time, when you know that we have experienced here, this particular place is vulnerable to all types of disasters, minus tsunami. Minus tsunami, you talk about maybe there are extinct volcanoes, but yeah, floods, we are vulnerable to floods. We are vulnerable to landslides. We are vulnerable to avalanche. We are vulnerable to glacial lake outburst floods, GLOF. And not much has not been done on that front also. And when we know that there recently, you must have seen that state has basically constituted a high-powered committee for GLOF. But importantly, because we know that Kedarnath, and we have seen that number of events which have taken place, GLOF events which have taken place in Uttarakhand, immediate neighborhood. And this particular, out of what we have done is what we have basically mapped lakes, those lakes which are vulnerable, and out of 68 lakes, we have found that 22 lakes in J&K have the potential of basically taking a GLOF event taking place in those cases. And then even if we talk about our Holy Amarnath cave, along the way, Sheshnag, Brahmsar and other lakes, we know that there are a number of lakes which are overhead along the path, which can tomorrow be basically, but that is the one instance, but there are a number of GLOF lakes in which have the potential of causing and initiating a glacial lake outburst flood. So you talk about any disaster, but that is there. But at the same time, there has to be a proper policy which would basically, the first step towards that was having a nodal agency for basically initiating steps in disaster management. But we have a full-fledged department of disaster management RRR. Then we have yes, there are certain bureaucrats also, there are certain, and then they have 4 or 5 consultants which have been hired on contractual basis. They're working on project to project basis. But that basically speaks about the seriousness that we, the policymakers, have about this type of existence taking place at the ground level. Yes, isolated events here, some institutions doing something, maybe this institution of engineering, they've done a wonderful job by basically having a talk on a seminar on this particular topic. But before that, I thought basically let us basically talk about. I would basically we talk about. So we need to basically first of all know that what is disaster risk. Yes, we have understood it, because after the HIGO framework for action 2005 to 2015, where it was basically they integrated this risk with sustainable development, but then after that, the Sendai framework, basically from 2015 to 2030, basically connected and integrated this risk management, this risk information and risk management with the sustainable development goals, the targets which had been set for 2030. And one of them was, importantly, was the risk management, the risk information. Importantly, you don't expect any system to basically run as long as it doesn't know that what are the likely risks to which we can basically hamper its growth, because you cannot basically, when you talk about development, you talk about sustainable development, that has to be related to the amount of the risk we have from different quarters. So importantly, as basically this, so as we basically talk about risk, we need to understand that it is essential to understand that the risk, the characteristics of this disaster risk have to be forward-looking, the likelihood loss of life, destruction, damage in a given period of time. 3 things were very important, which were mentioned in the HIGO framework for action, Sendai framework for action, which was after HIGO, 2015 to 2030. One of them was that, first of all, we need to prevent those situations which can cause risk. Second, we had to prevent the existing risk. And third was the building resilience, so that we could basically resist those impacts of those risks. And we know presently we are having, the risks are basically multiplying under the changing climatic regime. Just to give you an example, if we take 100 years of last year climatic data for the last 100 years, Indian meteorological data, even if we don't talk about that, we know that temperature and precipitation, let's just take these only 2 basic primary indicators, parameters, temperature and precipitation, both are showing a changing trend. And you know, climate change is responsible for number of natural events taking place throughout the globe. Just to give an example, this is what has happened. If between 1980 and 1990, 1.19 million people were killed in disasters. Between 2000 and 2000, the number of deaths reached 1.23 million. No doubt, importantly, we need to keep in mind, technologically, we have moved ahead. Yes, we have moved ahead. Just to give an example, how natural interventions can take place. All of you know that cyclones hit Odisha. In 1990s, a cyclone hit. I can just give an example of a small minor intervention. 1990, cyclone hit 90s. A cyclone hit the coast of Odisha. There were thousands of deaths. And then in 2000s, again the cyclone hit the same coast, and the velocity of the cyclone was more. But the damage caused was very less. There was a minor intervention. Intervention was along the coastline, they established FM radio. And FM radio basically did a function which basically early warning systems could not have done, because by the time they basically expected the cyclone to hit the coast, they basically relayed it, broadcasted that news through the air, and people could be basically migrated, they could be shifted to safer places. So this is what is required at the ground level. This is where we failed in the last 2014 because we were not prepared for it. We do talk about the HIGO framework. After HIGO framework of action in Sendai, it was a shift from the post-disaster scenario to a pre-disaster scenario. It basically said that we need to preempt risks, and then we act in accordance to that. But in order to have preempt here, we need to have awareness, we need to sensitize people, we need to have capacity building programs, and at the same time, we need to have early warning system, because technological intervention is very important. We today talk about the system that BG infrastructure hai. Infrastructure theek hai, loss ho gaya, infrastructure hit karta hai. Yes, exactly. But you know, at the same time, when we talk of critical infrastructure, we can say bridges, we can say houses, we can say, then we can talk about health centers, we can talk about other facilities. But at the same time, we know that at the times of disaster, a school building also becomes a disaster management center, DMC. So again, it becomes a part of a critical infrastructure. So when we can compare 2005 earthquake. When the earthquake took place, major deaths were on the other side of the border. And one of the important things was that the timing did the difference basically was the timing. The timing was the people, the students there, the school children, most of them were, they lost their lives because they used to go early to their schools. And in our case, they had not basically, the timing was comparatively different. And the government buildings collapsed, and that caused thousands of deaths. So importantly, we need to realize that, so how do we resume? So if a country ignores disaster risk, let me talk about this, the country, we can come to the region, we can come to the local level. So it allows this to accumulate, is in effect undermining its own future potential for social and economic development. We cannot basically stop any place, any region, any from socio-economic development. But that has to be integrated. When we talk about it, the socio-economic development has to be sustainable. It has to be integrated with, yes, it has to be risk information system, risk management, which is very important thing. That's why the focus has shifted from the overall disaster management to disaster risk reduction. Within this disaster risk reduction, this risk information development has basically taken a central stage. So we need to basically see how in that context the disasters would not, these hazards would not change into disasters. I believe what Sir ne pehle bataya, what basically, yes, planning was very good. Yes, Jawaharnagar came up, Rajbagh came up, other came up. But at the same time, if we basically know that the whole area has been basically settled in the floodplain. Floodplain is basically part of the river. Importantly, keeping in mind that, yes, Jhelum course is there. What we have seen in the last time, yes, because all the natural systems are basically connected to each other. Deforestation taking place, leading to erosion, erosion finding its way into, sediment finding its way into the water body. This is what has happened. It is not that there in the past, there has not been intermittent or rainfall of that year. But what has happened is our carrying capacity has decreased. Our basically erosion has basically, the siltation has taken place. Our water bodies are here. Just give an example of Abhi sir dikha rahe the, Pohru likha hota niche pe. And you know, Pohru river, importantly, Ministry of Agriculture, Government of India identified Pohru under their river valley programs, RVPs. And it had been basically prioritized for soil and sediment loss in 1974-75. And then it was repeated. The same Pohru catchment was, because Pohru catchment is the largest catchment in Kashmir Valley with an area of 1,89,410 hectares. And this catchment has got 8 sub-catchments, because now we don't use the word catchment, we use a watershed for both of them. Because over the period of globally, we basically talk about a watershed, because Americans basically decide what is to be used. So once they repeated this word, yeah, because by definition both of them are the same, but the difference between the watershed and the catchment was in terms of area. So what we Pohru, which was taken up as a in 1974-75 for under the River Valley programs, RVPs, again it was prioritized for soil erosion problems in 2002 by All India Soil and Land Use Survey, ISLUS, under Ministry of Agriculture. So what we found is, in both the time when we went for change detection, what we found that most of the areas, most of the micro watersheds, which were in a low priority area, they had shifted to the high priority area. That means, because we know, even if we know, if a common man is told in the last 10, 30, 40 years, large-scale deforestation has taken place, and that has basically made soil vulnerable to erosion conditions. Because we know once you remove the vegetative cover, your soil basically is vulnerable to, because you have something what we call as raindrop velocity. And raindrop velocity has a straight effect on the soil, because it basically initiates what we call as splash erosion. And now that splash erosion basically ultimately leads the soil, and soil's sediment basically with the surface runoff ultimately moves into the water body. And that water body basically, given siltation process takes place, that means its water carrying capacity decreases. This is what has happened throughout the valley. So importantly, when मैं सर का भी note देख रहा था Mabni sir का, so what he has basically talked about, we need to go dredging, we need to basically excavate the silt out of it, so that water carrying capacity of these Jahlim and its tributaries increases, and that ultimately basically that pressure basically decreases, and that would be, because you do expect that these types of conditions, keeping in mind that there's a pressure on the natural resources, the population is increased, it is going to increase in the future also. We have a planning, that holistic planning is needed, but at the same time we know that our planning approach is faulty. Because importantly we have, and then at the same time we have some natural limitations also. Either, for example, if you talk about north and south, your settlements can basically go towards north or towards the south. There is a limitation on the east and the west side because of the mountainous terrain. So our planning approach has to go synonymously with our physiographic conditions. As a geographer, basically, I would say basically, because you cannot move on that side and that side, because ultimately that leads straight. At the same time, we know, for example, because we know, importantly, this south-facing slopes, they basically are, they are south-facing, because in the northern hemisphere, we know that south-facing slopes are they are vulnerable to, yes, this anthropogenic impact, but at the same time, the photo period on the southern slopes in the northern hemisphere is comparatively this than in the northern hemisphere. So when the photo period is more, that means the rate of evapotranspiration is more. When your rate of evapotranspiration is more, that the more this moisture is lost, and that's why we have less vegetation on the. So our planning approach has to take that also into account. So it has to be. That's why when we talk about any planning process today, we talk about multidisciplinary approaches, and this is how we can basically decrease the risk, which is in line with the Sendai framework which basically said that we have to prevent risk. We don't have to wait to create a situation so that no new risks are created. And third, we talk about sustainable development, integrating this whole concept with this. So these are the disaster management, risk management. We talk about threat recognition, risk and vulnerability identification. We talk about risk analysis. We talk about risk control options, structural, non-structural, cost benefit. We talk about strategic planning, economic, political, institution support consideration. Yes, importantly, we know, yes, economic and but political decisions are taken. The policy decisions are taken at the top level. But at the same time, we know at some point of time, there have to be interventions wherein this policy decisions could be influenced, and they could be influenced in such a way so that we could basically, a realization would basically come that it has to be through involvement of experts. There has to be a multidisciplinary approach. It's not only that an engineer would be involved, it's not any an earth scientist would be involved, it's not any, but it needs to be have a multidisciplinary, because over the period of time you must have seen that subject boundary जो हमारे यहाँ exist करती थी या कहीं भी globally, that has basically thinned. So, and you talk about anything, because if you talk about any policy planning, if it is not for society, it basically. So then you have this response, recovery, reconstruction, rehabilitation, knowledge management, sustainable development, resilience building, and community participation. All this ultimately leads to what we call as this is the interrelationship between conventional disaster management and disaster. So this is what has changed over the period of time. This is the pragmatic of a preparedness planning, how to respond. That is preparedness plans, warning systems, response efforts. Because what I basically said is that it has, now we have to preempt a risk. And for that, what has happened is that it has shifted from a post-disaster scenario. Our approaches, our methodologies have to be now pre-disaster scenario. So for that, important is capacity building. For that is technological intervention. For that is early warning systems. For that is sensitizing people. I'll give an example. This Kashmir earthquake 2005. It was expected that no buildings would now be constructed on slopes. Because once there is a shaking of the earth, the first thing is that the buildings on the slopes would basically crumble. But at the same time, still you can go to Udi, which was expected to basically but still you will find buildings on the destabilized slopes. Yes. Yeah, there's no, yes, exactly. But sir, yeah, they are poor. But sir, importantly, what was here? Universe that the government has to take what, that is where they say the government has to basically come in. Because importantly, if we are talking about a developing or basically constructing earthquake resistant structures, there the expertise which is being lacked, their government could basically intervene. People are, sir, spending lakhs of rupees on other things of beautifying their house, even in some areas, but they are not basically aware about that what there is a simple list where earthquake resistant structures could be constructed by basically just undoubtedly by the engineers, but generally people are not aware about that. Even if they are aware, they don't take it so seriously. Sir, they have developed a model village in Odi, which was expected to be a model village for. But there also, what I feel, the new constructions which have initially जो उन्होंने construction की है, that's in line with the earthquake resistant structures. But then what they have done is, जो फिर extensions हुए हैं, they are again following the same procedure. So who is allowing that to take place? So that is what is to be seen. So these are the different approaches, what basically international decade for national disaster reduction, Yokohama strategy, then international strategy for disaster risk reduction, Hyogo framework for action, and Sendai framework, which we are presently basically were from 2015 to 2030, and by 2030 we expect that there would be, this is what is called about integration of risk management, risk information with the sustainable development concept, wherein the targets have been set by 2030. We are going to achieve what, not only reducing the impacts of climate change, not only basically talking about reducing poverty, not only talking about reducing inequalities. All of these are basically related to each other, which ultimately, say poverty hai, you don't expect, unless and until you don't take those initiatives which can basically reduce poverty, naturally you don't expect that society or that community to respond. So this is something where these are taking place. This is the recorded disasters. Then, for example, if we talk about this disaster versus development, okay, importantly, this is the development realm, and we know that development can increase vulnerability, because if it is unplanned development, it could basically increase the vulnerability. But at the same time, if it's a planned development, it can basically reduce vulnerability. Importantly, disaster can set back development in a place like ours, where you say that 1 lakh crore rupees were basically expect. So there, what can happen is that disaster can basically set back this wheel of development. But then in a developed part also, where you have those possibilities, disaster can provide development opportunities which can basically reduce the impacts at the large level. So a disaster has a positive realm and it has a negative realm, But importantly, we need to see that where do we exist? Where so this is what is risk-informed development. Yes, disaster risk reduction, climate change adaptation. These are the natural hazards, and then there are hybrid hazards. Because importantly, and let me tell you very frankly, before COVID-19, 2019, COVID-19, we are not expecting this time because that has been included in the list of disasters now, an epidemic, where basically the whole world collapsed. We did not have any policy to basically, even if the Ebola 2014 had taken place, but still the world, the global community did not have anything in response to that, and that's why it had a large effect. So there are hybrid hazards, pandemic, droughts, floods, and then there are other things with financial instability, terrorism and organized crime, and nuclear and chemical warfare. So all of these are basically part of this risk-informed decision making to safeguard development. We need to see that how it can be done. So this is the future plan focusing on future development path. Development takes place in an environment of risks, while current development pathways create risks faster than we can manage them. That's very important. We need to see that whether we have that policy in make, whether we have that, we can manage risks. We are not creating new risks. So that should be our focus on. Our future development pathways should be on like that. So understanding the complexity of risks. Risks need to be understood as being interconnected and systematic. Then transforming to risk-informed development. So disaster risk is not enough. We need to transform our development pathways to risk-informed development. That's what has basically. Then building capacities for an enabling environment, building capacities and promoting an enabling environment to make decisions risk-informed is a key. Fostering participation, addressing inequalities, fostering the participation of all members of society, and systematically addressing inequalities are cornerstones of risk-informed development. Continuous adaptation for sustainable growth. There is no universal blueprint. Risk-informed development needs to be tailored into the context with sufficient flexibility to reevaluate and adopt continuously. You must all know that when Brinland Commission came up with the definition of sustainable development, primarily it was addressed to the developing countries. Underdeveloped had a problem, the developed countries had a problem, but at the same time was primarily addressed to the developing and the underdeveloped countries. And the main focus was on the so we need to basically say that we have to tailor-made our responses in accordance to our ground realities. So then RID decision making, sustainable risk-informed decision making is a prerequisite for sustainable development, fundamental to preventing the creation of risk, which is in line with the Sendai framework for action. So this is what we have to do is that we have to disaster risk reduction cuts across 2030 sustainable development goals. So we have to basically see that out of 25 targets directly and indirectly related to disaster risk reduction, 10 of the 17 sustainable development goals firmly establish the role of disaster risk reduction as a core development strategy. So thank you. Thank you.
It's my experience.
Thank you.
Was a wonderful experience.
Thank you.
I will consider.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. Definitely, it was a cherishful experience having a good teacher. What I find in this particular classroom, sort of where we can learn all the basics about this disaster management or risk management. So the main idea out of it is our sustainable approach should be manage the risks. We have to manage risks will be there. We have to manage. Now I won't take much of time. I will now request our chairman, Engineer Iftikhar Ahmed sir, to come on and deliver very precise. I can never be precise.
I can see a bias in the time is allotted to various speakers. Because of has been given half an hour.
Half an hour? Sorry, I don't know. This is John.
A copy of the
I will not take 30 minutes because I think
we are proposing
lunch
to
के लिए
lunch.
बचते हैं. lunch के लिए तो 15 minutes है. ठीक है. चाहिए
Disappointed?
फॉरवर्ड चाहिए थी
Forward, ये चीज़-
पॉइंट अच्छा Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. I think all of you must be tired now because you listen to almost 2 hours of presentations, but most of all the presentations were interesting. Salim Saab touched the issues like preparedness and response. Rafiq Saab emphasized the that the focus on outcomes rather than the outputs. And then the classroom lecture of Parvez Saab gave all the sort of legal background as well as the sort of international sort of context to disaster risk reduction. So I'll try to focus on because I have been a planner throughout my career, so I'll try to focus on parts of planning, but I'll try to be precise and we'll try to conclude in 15 minutes. So I'm grateful because this seminar was funded by headquarters. So I'm grateful to headquarters for funding the seminar on integrated risk-informed planning for sustainable development. Despite the fact that we have Hyogo framework, you have Sendai framework, a lot of work has not been done on risk-informed planning and development, and there are still not sort of set models which are practiced by different countries. So it's still in infancy. This field is still in infancy. So that's why I have been working on the subject for some period of time, and I have found that there are no set models at all. But some work which has been put in practice has been in New Zealand, which is called risk-based planning approach. So we'll discuss that planning approach and how that is relevant to our context. So the outline of the presentation is theoretical foundation for risk-informed planning, foregrounding the loss of historical water systems. Everybody talked about how many water systems we have lost, and then master plans, which have been actually the plans for the disaster. So, and then we'll think, this will be kind of a primary thinking on foundations for risk-based planning approach for Srinagar. So land use has always been a major tool for reducing risk from natural hazards. So if you plan your master plans, if you have proper master plans, then half of the risk is over. So land use planning is a major tool for reducing risk from natural hazards, aiding sustainability and resilience. And land use more restrictive as the risk increases. Land use becomes more restrictive as the risk increases. So Parvez Saab talked about these, that role of land use plans to control or prevent development in extreme risk areas and to mitigate risk in existing developments. This is what United Nations Office for Disaster Reduction says. And then the Sendai framework says prioritized disaster risk governance to manage disaster risks. What is the basic focus of risk-informed or risk-based planning approach? It's actually moving from likelihood of an event to consequences associated with the natural hazard events. I'll explain it in the maybe subsequent slides. So you make a clear statement for the policymakers and the decision makers that whether the risk is acceptable, tolerable, or intolerable. And you also incorporate the views of the stakeholders. How to ensure that potentially controversial decisions over land use options are robust and defensible. So what is risk-informed planning and policy? Risk-informed urban planning and policy frameworks provides a structured approach to incorporating risk assessment, mitigation, and resilience building into the planning and decision-making processes of the cities. So such frameworks help urban areas better understand and address various risks, including natural disasters, climate change, infrastructure vulnerabilities, and socioeconomic challenge. So what is the current scenario? In situations where likelihood of an event is deemed low, for example, probability of a flood 1 in 100 years, because the likelihood is very low, so you don't prepare for it. So if you think in terms of likelihood only, you don't need to prepare for it. But what are the consequences? You have to prepare for the consequences. Heart of risk-based planning approach is the ability to delineate between different levels of risks. So you have clearly, for decision makers and policy makers, they know which risk is acceptable, which risk is tolerable, and which risk is not acceptable or which is intolerable. So this is RBPA's risk-based planning approach, can be used to address the effects of particular natural hazard either with other hazards at the same location, which is called, you can have 2 hazards or 3 hazards happening at the same time. That's what is called cumulative hazards, or with cascading hazards like earthquake. Earthquakes can result into liquefaction. They can also turn into tsunamis. So these are called cascading hazards. So framework for, what is the framework for the risk-based planning approach? This framework directs planners to focus on social, cultural, built, economic, and health safety consequences of a natural hazard. Move beyond the practice of planning for hazard to planning for risk. You are not planning for hazard, you are planning for the risk because of the hazard. So you incorporate both likelihood and the consequence. So I have given this example, I actually said it. Focus on return period makes it difficult for technical experts and political decision makers to be adequately forward thinking, particularly where decisions are required on what appear to be unlikely event.
Yes, sir. I think the definition of 1 in 100-year flood or 150-year flood is wrong in the sense it's understood by the planners or the politicians. It doesn't mean that it will occur after 100 years or 50 years. The definition is that a flood which equals or exceeds, for instance, we had this flood in 2040. It doesn't mean that this flood will occur after 100 years. If a flood occurs today which exceeds or equals that discharge, so this becomes the 1 in 100.
That's the reason. The decision makers understand it that it will happen once in 100 years. It doesn't mean that. It means the probability historically is 1 in 100, but it can happen 10 times in 100 years. It doesn't matter.
Between 1 and 100. Between 1 and 100.
It can even occur next year.
So what are the 5 steps of risk-based planning approach? First step is know your hazard. First step is scope of the issue to be addressed. Which hazard are you addressing? Is it flood? Is it earthquake? So you have to clearly define which hazard are you addressing. Identify the team of professionals. Now it is not the planners which will in isolation prepare master plans for the ST. It's actually the team of planners who will actually work on the risks. So public engagement strategy, and then the stakeholder engagement has to be there. So stage 2 is assemble hazard information, collecting all the information about the hazard, material for engagement, then material for engagement with the stakeholders. And then second is determine the severity of the consequences. Build a picture of the possible consequences of a natural hazard event, information about proposed development and existing land use. So all this information has to be collected at the step 2. Evaluate the likelihood of an event. Assess likelihood that will result in consequences. Cumulative hazards may increase likelihood. Number 4 is take a risk-based approach. Stakeholder acceptance of I'll explain it through a diagram. These are 2 different approaches. Right one is the risk-based planning approach, and the left one is the risk management process. So since I don't have the time, so we'll maybe indulge into discussion after the presentation is over. So this is the consequence matrix. So you define the consequences in terms of whether the consequences are catastrophic, major, moderate, minor, and insignificant. So this is the classification of the consequence matrix, and everything is defined here. I won't go into the details. maybe we'll have some time to explain it in the second part. And then you have a likelihood scale. So you define everything in terms of the levels. Likely, if the event is likely, you say it 5, 4, 3, 2, and 1. So this is the approach I have used is the one which has been used in New Zealand. So they have said that any event that the possibility is up to once every 50 years, it's likely event. So then you quantify consequences and you club the two, consequences as well as the likelihood, and then have the results of these two. And then this is the final where you define all the red ones or something which is these are the areas which is acceptable part of the risk, and then these are the areas which is tolerable, and then this is the area which is intolerable part of the risk. So Srinagar, some critical issues. This was some theoretical background of the risk-based planning approach, and now this is how the Srinagar has changed during the last 50 years. From a very compact city to a city which shows huge urban sprawl. This is what is called urban sprawl. The Srinagar is not actually now compact city, it's facing huge urban sprawl. And because of this urban sprawl, you can easily connect this urban sprawl with the death of most of the wetlands in this area in the last 100 years. We've lost these wetlands because of this urban sprawl. And we know that once we had these water canals, they have actually this canal where children swam is a road today, is Nalai Mara. So we have lost a lot of water systems. This is the map of the 2014 floods. Half of the city was inundated. So this is again a photograph which you have seen. And what are the major reasons for the disasters? These are the reasons. I don't want to explain them. And then some is the legal urbanization, which has actually been terrible. Illegal urbanization is always terrible, but legal urbanization is also terrible. And Bemina is one of the cases of legal urbanization. Yeah, maybe. So we have a huge, long history. I won't want so Srinagar, the location of the city. This is the red part is the Greater Srinagar. It's located between two Himalayas. So it's from climate point of view, it's in critical shape. So our planning has to be very robust and should have very strong foundations. So this is the planning context. We had a circular road project which actually predated the master plan, the first master plan. Then we had 71, 91 master plan. These are the master plans first. This is the second one, and then this is the land use. After, if anybody had doubts about what land use is, this is the land use plan of the city in 2015. So the focus of the city plans have been to urbanize these areas. This is a sort of indicative diagram of the master plans. So our focus has been to urbanize this area. And the map which I showed about the loss of wetlands, you can easily see we have lost most of the wetlands in that region. So it's because of the legal urbanization that we have lost wetlands. And despite the fact that the focus of the first two master plans was this northwest part of the city, only 25% had urbanized by 2015, because people had natural deterrence to moving to those areas because of their local wisdom and local knowledge. This is, I don't have to. So this is the context of the master plan which we prepared. Different layers, GIS layers were prepared, and then we actually determined more suitable, moderately suitable, not suitable areas for the urbanization of the city. And then the almost 50% of the area gets inundated. That is the reason we had very high density of this tea, which was construed as that Srinagar was an urban slum because the density was high. It was actually because of the local wisdom. We had actually built compact houses, compact structures. So what should be the strategy for the urbanization of this tea? It is actually going for increased densities and then development of satellite townships and the combination of the two. This, I think, this is how we have moved in the master plans, expanding towards the area which has ecologically very sensitive areas, and we have urbanized all those areas. Another factor for see the lighter colors are the low bearing capacities. We have moved to the areas which have very low bearing capacity, and that makes these areas vulnerable to flooding as well as to liquefaction. And then we are dependent on the drainage sort of pumping stations, 80 pumping stations for you can see all our ecological assets are in this area, and we have urbanized these areas. So we need risk-informed planning for Srinagar. I think within 2-3 minutes. One of the major reasons that Srinagar has a long history. It's almost 2,005 years of written history, and we know exactly where Srinagar was 5,000 years back. And then now a lot of huge work has been done by Jahlim Tawi flood recovery project. If that work is not used for actually risk management and for making the foundation for the risk-informed planning, it will all go waste. So that there disaster risk database we have, IOFS we have river morphology studies, and then building code is also there. The building code is also there. So a lot of work has gone into other related unified building bylaws have been there. National building code is there. But unfortunately, if some of you must have gone through national building code, it classifies terrain for roads only, hilly for roads only. It doesn't classify terrain for urbanization. That is still a lacuna with the National Building Code of 2016.
That is why we thought of this building code for J&K. Otherwise, the people would ask us, why building code when you have national building code?
Another issue that I was part of the committee which was framed by Niti Aayog. They had framed a committee to frame guidelines for hilly regions, and they have not been able to still frame the guidelines for hilly regions, which would have become part of the National Building Code. This is the so this is one of the detailed maps at Tehsil level, vulnerability atlas I think it's Tehsil based for Kashmir region. I think entire Kashmir. Yeah. It's entire UT. So the following are the key components of risk hazard and risk information relevant to planning. We have this hazard and risk information is available now. We have this information available now. Decision based on risk rather than just hazard. We have to actually have the two tables where I said the severity index and the likelihood index is actually part of the legal framework of New Zealand. We don't have that kind of legal framework. That legal framework has to be developed here. Then only can we have risk-informed planning. With climate change, the context of managing natural hazards is changing. So thank you very much.
I have a suggestion. I probably would break for lunch at 2. We'll finish the program. So we still have maybe.
Muslim lunch ready.
They can wait for 15-20 minutes.
To put some.
Monday something will change. Like really, big question.
That's bozo aram sa.
I was just a suggestion.
Aram sa bozo bekar na. Chalo gusto man.
Inspector Sir, can we, ऐसा कुछ change की post lunch session? We can continue and we can have lunch after. Huh? Okay, okay. Thank you, Chairman Sir, for adding more insightful information with respect to the theme. As there is a change in the schedule of, so that we can have a easy lunch after completing this whole session. Now, once again, there is a, shall we continue question answer?
If you have Bhakti Sahib lecture first,
Yeah, then we can,
we can
yeah.
focus on his office.
Now I request our chief guest for the day, basically for 2 days program, our senior most engineer S.R. Madni Saab, please come on the stage and share your valuable words with us.
Light shade, let's just see. What a light, so.
Jahangir sir, me and pen drive.
Thank you, everybody. Mr. Chairman and distinguished audience. I am highly indebted to the Institution of Engineers, Srinagar, for inviting me to this seminar. Eminent speakers have already deliberated on the subject, and there is hardly anything left for me to say. It being customary for the chief guest to share his views with the audience, I like to do so, which may or may not be quite relevant with the topic of the seminar. We are frequently faced with natural and man-made disasters. Whereas natural disasters like earthquakes, tsunamis, tornadoes, tectonic shifts, lunar activities are beyond the human control, the human sufferings can be minimized by the inbuilt relief and rehabilitation mechanism. Man-made disasters like wars, terrorism, crime, arson, civil disorders, biological, chemical threats, cyber attacks, global warming can only be averted by the people and their governments. Indiscriminate use of hydrocarbon by the developed countries has given rise to global warming, resulting in rapid melting of glaciers. In India, 70% power generation is from thermal plants. And same is the case with China and other countries. It has not only resulted in frequent occurrence of floods, but also reduction of water needed for agriculture and drinking water. Therefore, it is high time that a quick shift to non-conventional sources of energy be made as an alternative to hydrocarbon and coal. Depletion of water resources during the last 50 years in the J&K UT is visible both for irrigation and drinking water. There is water crisis in most of the parts of Srinagar city, despite installation of pumping stations, drawing water from Dal Lake, Jhelum River, and Dudh Ganga. I remember in 1962, we had only one plant in Srinagar, that was Nishat. And the water was coming from Dachigam River, Dachigam Nala, and Sindh Extension Canal. Incidentally, I have walked over from Gandharbal on this Sindh Extension Canal up to Dachigam, and then from Dachigam onwards to Nishat, and Nishat to Sharabkal. The water was coming to the palace. It had sufficient water, gravity water. There were no pumping stations. All the same, we can say the population has increased, but at the same time, the production has also increased. Since then, we put in Palestine, then we put in Rangil, then Tanganar, then we have this Rakhna also. Part of it is being fed into the city, but yet there is a crisis. And now the pumping from River Jhelum as well as from, so the water resources even in our state has diminished. Sustainable development for creating assets durable is a key issue to be focused by the policymakers, planners, engineers, and developers. It can well be achieved if the stakeholders are taken on board as partners in the development. Srinagar Smart City have carved out beautiful footpaths in the parking slots. Footpaths in the downtown, which have either become show windows of shopkeepers or parking lots. It's a treat to travel in the smart buses, but there are no designated passenger shelters. Had we taken the stakeholders into confidence, we would have these assets which they have created for the beautification of the city would have been their responsibility, if not maintained, at least to look after these assets, which is not the case. Now, if with your permission, I would like to respond to some of uh, the papers which were presented here, especially from Salim Beg Sahib, who appears to me more of an engineer than an authority on art and culture of the. He has very well presented the paper and touched the subject of bullet committees. Let me tell you, there were two green books we had in connection with the combating of the floods. One was for the engineers and another was for the administrators. For the engineers, it had a set procedure for flood precautionary measures. And for the administrators, which was to be headed by the respective deputy commissioners and down to Tehsildars, was relief and rehabilitation after the floods. I don't know, because now I am out of the partnership since 1999. What is the situation now? And he was saying, he was telling us that every April there will be, yes, it was a must that every March the engineers had to inspect every bund, whether it was a river Jhelum or it was a tributary, and give a certificate that they are safe. And if there was anything to be done, it had to be done by April end. so that we would not face any problems. But all the same, there could be floods. It's not necessary, but you see, precautionary measures are more important than. Now these floods have occurred. Yeah, I was told by Salim Saab yesterday there was a good paper presented by one of our engineers as far as the floods is concerned. You see, they have these floods are because we have vandalized the catchment area. As pointed out rightly, if the by Mr. Salim Beg, if the catchment was green, water retention would be there. It would, you see, create a sort of a speed breaker for the